Good evening, everybody. Welcome to NPEN's latest addition to our YouTube channel. We've got an amazing guest with us today. This programming is sponsored by the nurses, a volunteer group that work solely with those that have a DNA shock. We are all volunteer RNs that help out with working with folks that deal with the acute phase of that shock, and giving them resources and finding therapists for them, and also letting them have I'd say a seasoned mentor, another person that's gone through a DNA shock. So I'm excited today to introduce you all to Leann. I'm going to go over her autobiography. I'll say her biography because it's extensive and it's an incredible amount of wonderful things that she has done in really as a citizen in the United States. I was so impressed with this, Leann. She received her PhD from the University of Illinois. Dr. Mischel, make sure I'm saying your name right. Is Leann Mischel?
Either Mischel or Michelle. They're both correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
Dr. Mischel.
I'll answer to either.
She received her PhD from the University of Illinois and is currently Associate Professor of Management and Entrepreneurship and Department Chair for the Management and Decision Sciences at Coastal Carolina University in South Carolina. Prior to her joining that university, she spent 12 years as a professor at Susquehanna University in Pennsylvania. And she's also been involved in her own startup company and held senior positions with Fortune 500 companies, including JP Morgan, Chase, and Priceline. As a mother of two children conceived using anonymous donors, she has been active in the donor-conceived community for quite a number of years. One of the reasons I brought her on is because of this particular thing she did. She created the Facebook group Donor Conceived Best Practices and Connections, which now has over 25,000 members and is the largest source of information for the donor conception folks on Facebook. She has been featured in many magazine and television shows worldwide to help bring attention to these issues related to donor conception. She currently serves on the board of advisors of many nonprofits and assists on those boards. She is a frequent conference speaker, presents papers internationally, and is widely published in academic and professional journals. Her work has been recognized in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and USA Today. She recently published a book called Succession and I guess it's on Amazon, right, Leann? That
Yes.
People can purchase. And honestly, that book is what intrigued me the most about Leann when I reached out to her, because of the leadership that we do in this field with the DNA shock. I mean, this is a fairly new phenomenon, but Leann's been involved with this for 15 years. But those of us through the NPE group, those of us came around and we were left not knowing where to go and where to find the help we needed. And Leann, you were doing all this way back when in the donor conceived community. And so we're very grateful that you're here. I want to start out by saying that because you have done the work you've done, please share with us a little bit more about your present work and inform us about where you're at, because you're not involved with that group any longer.
That is correct. So when I started that group, obviously I had no idea that it was going to grow to the size that it is now. And I owe that growth really to my now admins and moderators who have taken over. But when I first started it, I was advertising it and trying to get people in there, and it was very small, and I was trying to do it all myself. And at some point, someone reached out to me and said, "Leann, do you need any help? Because I see that all of the messages are coming in at once." And then I try to read everything, and I'm like, "Yes, please, I do need help." And it just kind of grew from there, and it got to the point where it got so big, and I just didn't have the time to dedicate to it. And I had other moderators and admins who were just much, much better at it than I was at that point. And I was just like, you know what? You guys are much better at this than I am right now. I am a bottleneck, and I'm passing the torch. Um, and they're really doing a fabulous job, and they continue to. And it's I can't even tell you how much work it is for them. People don't realize how much goes on behind the scenes with moderating a group this size. And I will tell you that the discussions that are going on in messaging behind the scenes about posts and individuals and language and different arguments that might be happening is constant.
Yeah.
And
Yes, I agree.
the moderators and the admins, I would say each one of them probably puts in a good 20 hours a week, at least, um,
Yes, I agree
just
with you.
focusing on the group, which is really amazing. And it's a huge dedication. And I appreciate all of them. I've got 3 of them here, which I'm really glad to see.
I
Um,
know it's really awesome to have them here on this call and we are recording, so it's going to be nice for those to come back and look at this and see that you are speaking, and they get to hear your voice and what you've been doing with your life lately. Uh, what have you noticed, as a parent compared to what was there 15 years ago and what is going on now? How would you compare like being informed as then compared to now?
Yeah, that's a great question, because my oldest is now 20 and my youngest will be 18 next week. And when I started doing this, I didn't know very much. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go get an anonymous donor. I want to have kids, but back then there wasn't a whole lot of information, and it was probably out there, but we didn't really know where to look or how to find it, or but there really was an issue, that there really was anything to look for. So the world has changed a lot. And of course, back then it was really unacceptable to do what we did. So to have children as a single parent using donor conception was, I got a lot of pushback. And as you know, I've been on the Today Show and a whole bunch of other shows and in the news. And um, there was a lot of pushback and a lot of really nasty things said about me and my choices, because it really wasn't acceptable back then.
Yeah, I
So
understand what you're saying about that. And, you're right. I mean, the changes that have happened now, and, you can maybe speak a little bit to this, you know, as we know now, donor conception isn't what you went through is intentional on
right.
your part. What we know happened to those of us that had the surprise and shock of our lives. It was just a killer. A lot of us here, I see people in the call now that it's heartbreaking. I remember 10 years ago when I found this out, how that it had impacted me. What are your feelings, now in the light of what had the informed community we have around anonymous donation? And in your viewpoint, what are the 3 priorities you see that is in the industry that needs to be done right now?
Another great question. So I think we have definitely made progress. The fact that we see actors and actresses using anonymous donors and talking about it in the open, and that was always my goal. Let's talk about it. Let's get it normalized, so
Mhm.
that people don't think that those of us who do this are wackos, and that our children are weird, because they're not. It's an absolutely natural process. But I think the three things that we really need to focus on right now is legislation, communication, and counseling. So legislation, obviously, from the standpoint that the banks really need to be legislated, as far as how many children are allowed, where those children are going to be, how many families can use the donations. I know that my children have at least, and I use two different donors for my kids, and I know that they have at least 100 siblings each.
Ugh,
And
oh my
it's
God.
and we're meeting new ones all the time.
Oh my God. I didn't realize, Leann, I never asked you that question before. I had no idea. That just breaks my heart to hear that. I mean, I
Yeah.
just,
And I
like,
love these kids, and
oh, I know
I
you do. I'm
absolutely
sure,
love
I
them.
can't even imagine, Uh, one of the things about my heart about this whole thing is, and my cousin is on this call. She knows we have unfortunately a fertility doctor that was a cousin in the family or married into our family. And it was heartbreaking for us to find this out that he had broke that he went across that ethical line. I'm not going to say his name, but he was mentioned in the article and it was an article today in CNN, or yesterday, excuse me, in CNN. And it's like, how do you can't
Yeah.
even, there's no words for it. I mean, the medical society there let him get away with it. He's now retired due to this coming out in light. He's an old man. He's in his 80s now, but it's just heartbreaking what has happened to, in our society in regards to all this.
It
So,
really is. And,
yeah,
so I say we need the legislation.
right,
People have to know what their genetic lineage is. And then the second thing that
yeah,
I mentioned is communication. And I
exactly.
think we need better communication from the banks and from the donors, as well as from individuals who do get pregnant using anonymous donors, because quite often they're not reported. So there's no way to track how many children are really out there.
Right.
And of course, communication from the standpoint that we need to talk to children early on and let them know what their background is and who their biological parents are, and and educate them from a very young age so that they know, and that it's not sprung on them later in life when, many of you have been through this, where you're wondering your whole life, what's different about me? Why do I feel different from my father or whomever? And then you find out as an adult, it it's not fair. It's not fair.
Exactly.
We
In
really
that
need
vein
to
of
have that
line of
communication.
thinking of all this, Leann, and this is kind of a hard question.
Yeah.
Um, have we set up, in your opinion, a human rights violation to those that are donor conceived due to exactly them not knowing from whom they came from? Do you feel it's a
Uh,
human rights violation?
yeah, in a lot of ways, I think we have. People have a right to know where they came from. And I think, our group and Cassandra, Ann, and Jody can all kind of testify to this, that it's really helped to educate us the effect that this has on people when they don't know. And if you can't share that information from the get-go, there needs to be some legislation that says, you've got to let people know.
But going back to a question that I was going to ask you earlier, about your book that you wrote,
Yeah.
Succession. Um, it, could you share a little bit about that book with us and how that work has informed you in your present time with the online donor conceived community?
Sure. So the book that I wrote, I actually wrote it with a friend of mine. We had done a lot of consulting for family businesses, And one of the challenges with family businesses is succession planning, because the parents often feel like they're never going to die. Their kids are never ready to take over a company. They can never do it as well as they can. So we wrote this book that is kind of a workbook that walks you through the succession planning process. And of course, one of the big things that we talk about in succession planning is that you have to, first of all, you have to plan ahead. You've got to know what your succession plan is going to be. And you have to put that in place well in advance of the time that you actually need it. And make sure that you have trustworthy people who kind of follow your vision and your mission for the company, so that you know that the company is going to be in great hands. And, you know, again, I've got three people here, Leann, Jody, and Cassandra, who are great examples of three people who have taken that group and just run with it and are, you know, continuing the legacy, which I'm really glad to see.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I'm very thankful to those guys because they are running a fantastic group. And in fact, Cassandra is one of our moderators in this NPE Life, my group that also is inclusive for the donor conceived and those like myself and NPE and late discovery adoptees. So it's that the work is so vital out there. And for many people, and this is not, you know, this is just the way it is, but many people cannot afford therapy. That's why I've set up NPEN so that we could have the ability to give them mentors and people volunteer to speak to them, and they're registered nurses, which I think is pretty cool. A lot of us are retired, but we're there for them, and we all are NPEs and we get it. So it's important to have people there in that process that understand what's kind of going on. And these three that are on the call, they are so well educated, and I know they're very thankful for what you've started. So one other question in regards to your thoughts on right to privacy versus right to anonymity.
You know, that's also a really great question, because when I started this process, it didn't bother me that there was anonymity, but now that I've seen the effect that it has on people, my mind has completely changed on that one. And I mean, I understand that there's a right to anonymity in some cases, but when you are donating sperm or genetic material, that's not the time.
That's right.
And it yeah, so I'm against the anonymity now. I think everyone has the right to know their genetic lineage, and to be in contact with that person.
What are your thoughts, Leann, on those that are now administrating the group, and yourself, of course, your opinion on this, obviously, with the diverse perspectives and experiences people bring in to that group? How do
Yeah.
you manage, how do you think about how would you manage that? You know, it sometimes we've seen that happen where
Yeah.
people are just so angry with each other.
Yeah. And part of me loves that. because
Yeah,
it, you know, if we're not angry with each other and not expressing our views, then we're not learning, right?
right.
So I love that we have different views in the group. You're right, they can be very, very polarized, which makes it very difficult, because people do get angry. But again, you know, I give credit to the moderators and the admins of the group, because they do a great job in kind of making sure that the discussions stay civil. And that is not easy, because people are very, you know, they're very polarized on a lot of these. But the
Yeah, I
important thing
mean,
is to
exactly.
listen to what
Yeah,
everyone has to say and take
right.
that in and understand that everyone has their point of view.
Yeah, you know, I've actually seen the group sort of expand to discuss, you know, like the donor conceived group. There was a very, I don't even know how to explain it, but it was a tough subject, and everybody had a word to say. And I finally think that the moderators had to stop commenting. They have to like turn it off, I guess is the best way to put it, because
Yeah,
it gets to be so, everybody is like all worked up, you know, and at what
yeah,
point you got to work on just realizing, hey, guys, we're going to do a timeout now and move on from this. And then, of course, it'll come up again in
Yeah.
a
And
month or
quite
two.
often, most of the time, it's the same issues coming up again and again and again.
Right.
So, we just kind of say, okay, can you just look at that discussion that we had 3 months ago or whatever and see where that went? Yeah,
Yeah,
you don't have to
I
rehash
agree
it a
with you. You
million
know,
times.
the thing about it is that I'm just getting a call in from our lawyer, and she's
Oh,
gonna
great.
speak for a few minutes. She's on, but she said she needs about 8 minutes before we need to utilize her. So we're in good shape with our time with you. Um, the expense of what happens to me with the emotional labor that is put in when you talk about these very personal and heartfelt issues that people bring in, become, I mean, I don't know about everybody here on this call, but and those that will be listening to the recording, but some of this stuff is really sometimes very difficult for even for me. And I'm administrator of several groups, so I understand, what that feels like. But I still believe in the groups being open and people just saying what they want to say. I don't at all want to be moderating somewhere where I'm not allowing people just to say their voice. Of course, we have to protect, people from not, mean and vicious on phone
Right.
calls or on the calls or on the messaging. But again, it's one of those things that it can be very difficult. So I guess let me go to I have a couple more questions for you, and we have a little bit of time, which is great because I wasn't sure when Jody was going to be joining us in here. Um, so in your opinion, do you see a new world when all parties in the IVF industry will be able to coexist, or will they always, or will we always be having to deal with all these issues? I mean, I guess that would be the perfect world, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a long time. I think it's going to be a long time primarily because the banks are out to make money. And unless we find a way for them to continue to make huge profits, which is what they want, but yet um not have the numbers that we have, um I I don't see that happening. So, and the regulation is going to cut their profits. And they're going to fight it. They're going to fight it tooth and nail. And so I think if it happens, it's going to take a long, long time.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I mean, I'm just at the point now where in fact, I've said this to a couple other people. I may have even said this to Cassandra on the call before. I know I've said it to Sabrina. It's to the point for me, I think I'm probably going to be gone when all
Yeah.
these things are settled. And it's heart wrenching for me to see what those in our groups that are donor conceived and never knew about it, and weren't told when they were children, That's,
But you know what? The point is that we're making strides. We're making
yeah,
progress,
that's
and
true.
it's worth the fight. It's worth the fight
Absolutely.
because there will be people after us who will continue the fight. And while progress will be slow, at least we're making progress.
Well, that's my hope too, is that this continual education, advocacy, and reaching out to to media, to reporters that will listen to us and,
Right.
interview those that have gone through this and, that are advocates and activists and willing to stick their neck out for the rest of the community, because there's a lot of folks, donor conceived, and those that are dealt with, like late discovery and adoptees. A lot of the people are very shy and in so much shock and mental anguish that they can't do it themselves. So we have people that have to step up to the plate, per
That's right.
se, and be that voice, for a huge group.
Right.
And you've been that, Leann, and I know now that you're not the admin in the group any longer, but you created that group 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I couldn't be more grateful for what you did, because when I went back looking had contacted you, I thought about, like, where do we all at some point let go of that lead and allow others to do the work that needs to be done? And that's exactly what you did. So I mean, it's an amazing thing that you have allowed others to go ahead and continue to do that work, you know. I
Well,
have,
at some point you realize that other people are better at it than you are. And they're the ones who are going to carry the torch much better.
yeah, no, I get what you're saying. There are some amazing people, you know, that have come about, um and I mean that's a good question to follow up on. That is like how have the voices of the DCP changed over the years? What do you think about that?
I think they have become much more vocal, you know, partly because we've been giving them ways to be vocal. And that was one of the main reasons why I started the group in the first place. It's because there wasn't a place where people could voice what was going on and share their experiences without being monitored in a way that they were told they were wrong. And you know, when you have an opinion about something or you're living something, you're not wrong. I mean, this is your life, and you're just trying to tell people about your experiences and share how you've dealt with it. And there wasn't an avenue for that when I started the group. And so I'm really happy to see that people have a way to share, to compare, to educate each other, to learn from each other, to share whatever resources they have, because that didn't exist before. And it's been really, really a great place for that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's so very important, the work that's going on, and it's going to continue. Obviously, as what you said, we don't have enough that has been done
Yeah.
thus far, especially when you brought up the legislation and communication, as you mentioned too. If we're not communicating uh, clearly, and of course, what's happened, what I say is that we have to say the same thing over and over again. What I've noticed, I don't know about you all, but that are admins to your donor conception group, but it is something like, I think every week I probably have to repeat myself about, you know, privately with those brand new that are coming in with this acute distress in their life, that they found out their donor conceived, they had no idea, or any of these. I mean, it's distressing when I see from the backside of things what's happening. It breaks my heart, and we do have to repeat ourselves, and we have to do it in a loving way. So that's what I constantly remind my moderators and stuff, that we need to do that, and make
Yeah, and
sure,
I think,
you know.
you know, yeah, and Cassandra, you make a very good point that people are not educated well enough. And that was my third point, is the counseling. And that is, you know, when people undergo uh donor conception, they need to be counseled from the
Exactly,
start, what they're getting into
exactly.
and how they need to handle this with their children.
Yeah.
And you're right, Cassandra, they're not getting that. So there's still a lot of work to be done, even with the clinics.
And we know how unethical many of these things are that they have done. I mean, one of the women on our call right now she's not donor conceived, but she is a late discovery black market baby born in Montreal. And
Wow.
she has mentioned to me, and she's actually said it in the chat, that she sees this, feels this, and feels like the similarities with their struggles are similar to our struggles, and what has been going on. There are many common things, but there is also things that are separate about different things that we all deal with. But we're a community we found through the last couple of years, that we should all come together and work as one as best we can. And
Absolutely.
it's a good way to help each other out, you know. I mean, one of the admins from the group, I guess Jody is a moderator, he mentions the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, Section 7 and 8. Um, I perhaps will put that up later in our notes when this is on a recording on the NPEN YouTube channel, but that it was an absolutely amazing event that happened I believe it was in Austria, led by Mr. Franz, I believe. He lives in Austria, and many of the folks came together. I believe it was in Geneva. If that's correct, Cassandra, let me know. I think that's where it was in Geneva, but yeah, she's nodding yes. So it's one of those things you just, because of the human rights issues that everybody that's on this call can relate to. What they did at that convention was, those section 7 and 8 was dealing with the human rights. When I mentioned that, when I asked you about that question early on, what you thought if the donor conceived community had had their human rights violated, and they were just infants, they were just babies.
Right.
So, it's hard for me to even begin to articulate the feelings and what everybody has went through. So I believe Jody is on the call. I'm checking to see when she's ready, but in summary, Leann, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for answering some of these difficult types of questions. It's things that we've heard over and over again, but it's good to see what's happened from 15 years ago to where we're at now in this process. We have an amazing group of people that are trying so hard and spend, like you said, 20+ hours, probably a lot more. Jody is ready. And Jody, when you come on to the call and start talking, please introduce yourself, because there will be others that will be able to watch this later. Jody is an attorney and will be speaking about, she's an expert on donor conception and the issues that we have just been sharing with Leann. Welcome, Jody.
Thanks for having me on. So I'm here in DC. We are just advocating for HR 451, which is the Protecting Families from Fertility Fraud Act. And I can talk a little bit about that bill and where it's at if you would like.
Sure.
Okay. So as you know, there's, definitely things at the state level that we have done. I've been working with a coalition of victims to pass now probably 9 to 10 of the 13 state laws. And there are, multiple states that have had cases of fertility fraud in them. And, it's always helpful to understand exactly what's sort of consigned to the states and what's consigned to the federal government in terms of law. So the states basically are where you find many of the medical malpractice claims. These include, violations of informed consent, medical battery, assault, that kind of thing. So civil claims. You also have criminal claims that tend to be low-level felonies for the most part. And some states have characterized fertility fraud as a sex crime, and others basically refer to it as fertility fraud. In the states that have a criminal component, basically it's, like I said, a low-level felony. You're looking at slightly over a year in jail if in fact someone gets any punishment. These criminal provisions are not retroactive due to a legal doctrine known as ex post facto, where doctors have to be charged under a crime that was on the books, but basically when they committed the offense. And so on the state level, not a whole lot of crimes can be charged 30 or 40 years after the fact. Certainly fertility fraud cannot, because these claims have timed out, again, due to most of the cases being in the 1970s and 1980s. So again, just to summarize, states are largely the province of medical malpractice and low-level, criminal violations. The doctor that has come closest to being prosecuted for fertility fraud actually was prosecuted for lying to the state of Indiana about whether he committed fertility fraud, which is, of course, very different from lying to patients about whether he's using his own sperm. And that was the former Dr. Donald Klein. His medical license was taken away, so he's just Mr. Klein at this point. And he was fined $500 and basically a slap on the wrist, no imprisonment, and level 5 felony in Indiana, which means he can expunge this year and restore his rights and get this off his criminal background check. So that's very problematic. So by the time we had reached 9 or 10 states, we were thinking, it's sort of that critical tipping point where more action is needed. And there are states that have not had cases, but could have a case. Doctors have done this. We have about 80 cases that we have confirmed so far. And it's just a matter of time before there's at least one case in all 50 states. So we were thinking that the federal level was going to allow us to reach more perpetrators, more physician perpetrators, and in different ways than state legislation can. So HR 451, the Protecting Families from Fertility Fraud Act, would actually apply to anyone who knowingly misrepresents the nature or source of DNA. And this applies both to assisted reproductive technologies, or the handling of oocytes, and artificial insemination, or the handling of sperm. And so basically what this does is it takes a look at, does the procedure in which fertility fraud occurred, in which someone knowingly misrepresented the nature or source of DNA, which that occurs, does it involve interstate travel? Does it involve interstate communication? Does it involve the doctor procuring interstate materials interstate? So for example, instruments, mediums, whatever paraphernalia is used in the procedure, so were payment transactions occurring between states. And so it casts a wide swath, and perpetrators who violate this actually would be subject to a much higher fine, up to $250,000, and a maximum of 10 years imprisonment, which is much, much more stringent than you would see on the state level. In addition, we have what I call the fun component of the law. And this is basically a federal racketeering law known as RICO. And you might think of, when you think of RICO, we usually think of the mafia. And I guess this is the sperm mafia, because we have multiple doctors inside of practice who have engaged in this behavior. And we basically could charge a fertility clinic or a practice as a racketeering and corrupt organization. So the federal racketeering law, RICO, has 26 offenses. They're called predicate offenses, and you must prove 2 of them within a 10-year period in order to successfully bring the suit. So this would add fertility fraud to the list of predicate offenses for federal racketeering. Fraud is already in there, so it's not a huge leap. And what's very interesting about RICO is that it allows the recovery of attorney's fees for the state, and it also allows victims to get restitution similar to a tort lawsuit. So that's a kind of unique attempt to sort of get something, other than a criminal conviction. Like the state bill, it would not be applied retroactively, again, due to ex post facto. But we know that these cases are happening more and more often. The most recent case we know of is in 2023. And we had a case from 2009 involving Dr. Christopher Herndon at the University of Washington, who actually engaged in this conduct when he was a physician at California. So, again, this is also very applicable when doctors cross state lines, when they're licensed in, for example, we had one doctor, Dr. Blute, who was licensed in Arizona and then traveled to Arkansas, I think, and then traveled to New York. And so he just hopped and skipped and jumped his way across the country. And in a question like that, in a case like that, when he engages in fertility fraud, hypothetically, in every state, which state has the first right to prosecute the doctor? And so, this qualifies these special individuals for higher penalties.
Wow. It's a lot. I mean, I appreciate this update. How are you guys doing in Washington, D.C. with the success rate with the Congress people?
It was a very successful visit. If you look at CNN, they had a visit. So yesterday we had a perfectly timed video from CNN about one particular victim of Dr. Bernard Caldwell in Connecticut. Her name is Victoria Hill, and she was with us in DC. And she was brave enough to tell her story to CNN and was a subject of basically like a 5 to 7 minute investigative reporting video that detailed the story. Now, her story is unique because she's not only the victim of fertility fraud, she is the first confirmed case that we know of where basically her high school sweetheart was also her half brother, because she did not know, of course, that he was donor conceived. He did not know he was donor conceived. And both of their mothers went to Bernard Caldwell. And she just found this out last year. And again, fertility fraud is the gift that keeps on giving in horrible ways, gifts that you never want to receive. And so she was brave enough to come on and tell her story and how devastating that discovery was, not only for her, but also her half brother. And that story has gained, I think it had 2.7 million views yesterday. And so it was the most watched story on CNN.
Wow.
And they did a follow-up video today. Today we met with Representative Bice, and we met with Representative Mischel, and those were the two sponsors in the House. We have 49 bipartisan co-sponsors, about half Republican, about half Democrat. And the next step will be actually to introduce this bill in the Senate. And the Senate, we're going to take a slightly different tact. We're going to, currently it's housed in 18 U.S.C. 109, which is the sex crimes provision of the Federal Criminal Code. We're going to put it into 18 U.S.C. 47, I believe, if I have my numbers right. It's been a long day. And that is the fraud component. And so what we were thinking was, it's much easier to prove fraud than it is to prove, sexual offense. And again, let's say you have an unscrupulous lab tech, and the unscrupulous lab tech just wants, and I mean just in quotes, just wants to be basically Genghis Khan and has a severe, I would say this is almost certainly a disorder, but he wants his sperm in as many places as possible. And this is something that is more a numbers game for him than a sexual turn on. And again, it's so hard to prove these individual motivations, but that would ease the burden on prosecutors bringing federal criminal charges against an individual like this, who may have swapped out his sperm for women who actually requested other donors, without telling anyone in the lab that he was, again, victimizing these patients in that manner. And so while it would be very hard to prove under the current federal bill, it would be much easier to prove under the one situated in 18 U.S.C. 47, which is the fraud provision. So, and I think based on the talks we've had this week, we're going to have Senator Britt introduce. Senator Cory Booker is going to be the Democratic lead, and we're going to have a bipartisan team of 4 other senators who hopefully will shepherd this through very quickly.
That is fabulous, fabulous news. And man, Jody, I appreciate you taking some time out of your hard working day to be with us. I mean, when I saw the CNN article come out, I had told Dr. Mischel, I said, we've got to see if we can get Jody on this call. And so we're so appreciative of you. And before we have you leave us, does any of you all have questions for her? Because we will stop recording for more intense questions with Dr. Mischel. Anybody have questions before Jody has to go?
There is an update video today that just aired around, I would say 7:35, 7:40. That's Eastern time. And so, again, that's a follow-up video. And so that shows, for example, Representative Bice, the meeting with her and some details there. But I think it's, the reception was very different than when we were here last year. Last year was sort of something of a sensationalist story still. And I think many more people had heard it and were eager to do something about it this time.
Right.
Yeah, I'm so proud of you guys, and those of you that are in leadership positions on the Facebook groups and any social media whatsoever. Let's reach out to find out what we can do as a group, and if we can help Jody, or I know Eve Wiley is there with Jody. Jody on
Eve,
on
Jacoba,
Victoria,
yeah.
Ballard, yeah. If you guys need something, we want to know, because we'd like to do whatever you guys need from us.
Well, it would be very helpful to call your representatives and your congressional representatives and ask them to co-sponsor, and also to call senators. And again, one of the things I do is I go on, if you have any groups that you guys may be administrators of, or who might appreciate a chance to learn more about fertility fraud, I'm always happy to go on and do a presentation. This is something I talk about. It's been a key research focus of mine for the last 5 years. So I'm happy to do that, and again, provide more public education on that subject.
Okay, I appreciate that. So thank you so much for joining us, Jody.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We're going to be hold on just a second, Sabrina, before stopping the recording. But I want to thank those of our audience that have joined us, and those that will be looking at the recording later on. This has been an extremely important topic in dealing with the donor-conceived community, and we're very appreciative to Dr. Mischel and Jody Madeira, an attorney that is an expert in the donor-conceived world. And we're so thankful to both of you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and if anybody wants to get a hold of me, Jody Madeira, I'm professor of Richard S. Melvin Professor of Law at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. So
I'll tell
Jody
you what,
Madeira.
I'll put a link up
Indiana
for that
EDU.
for you, okay?
That's great.
I will
Yes.
put a link up in the, on the, when we
Yep.
get this all set up. And
Sounds
so
great.
you'll be in good shape with that. So you don't have to worry to remember this. I can't even remember. I was getting ready to say my email for the nursing group that I volunteer with, and for people to be able to reach us. And you know what? I can't even think of my own email. So there you go. So it'll all be in the notes.
Thank you so
It'll all
much.
be in the notes. So we're so
Excellent.
thankful for
Thank
you.
you.
And we're thankful to the audience for being here. We are going to
Thank you.
Q&A, and we do not place that in the recording. So that's the part that is most important for people to understand, because we have a lot of raw information that we deal with on a personal level, and we're going to say goodbye to our audience out there in the internet world, and we're going to our Q&A now. Thank you all for being here on this.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Okay.
Jody, thank you for your input. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead and
Thank
stop
you.
the recording.
I like your
Sabrina.
background. I think we have the same one.
Yes, we do. How about that? Great minds think